Chat, episode 107. Appreciate our guest tonight. We're going to be focusing on mental health and student mental health. And there is the AASA mental health cohort. So we have leader of the cohort, Tobin Novasio, is here this evening, and John Malloy from AASA helps to coordinate all the different cohorts and consortium of the AASA Leadership Network. And we're going to focus on mental health. So let's get to it. I'm Peter Finch, superintendent of the West Valley School District in Yakima. We got Chris Nesmith, who is superintendent of the Alma School District in Washington State. Yakima is also in Washington State. Chris and I were colleagues once upon a time in the West Valley, and we're still colleagues, I guess. We're still colleagues as superintendents. So we were both in the district office in West Valley, and then both moved to the superintendency the same year. So it's really
these
fun
are
to continue.
soft little lobs, right? The most thing we're excited about is I just want to know more about you, Tobin, and you, John, where you're just going to talk about what you're doing, the work you're doing. And I want to know something really kind of fun about your community. And John, you have been all over the place.
Yeah, so that's our first question is, Tobin, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you at? Tell us about your community. And then John, we have no idea what your community, where you're at. So this will be fun to hear. So Tobin, why don't you go first?
John Malloy, International Man of Mystery.
International Man of Mystery.
So I'm in South Central Montana, and I'm at the Hardin Public School District. And so I would just say, an interesting fact, and you folks are both from out west, so maybe not as surprising to you, but some of our colleagues and friends out east when we talk about this. So the county that I serve in, Bighorn County, is the size of the state of Delaware. And our district makes up 2/3 of that. So I have about 1/3 of my bus routes travel over 200 miles a day.
Oh, wow.
We are located and we predominantly serve the majority of the Crow Indian Reservation, and then some parts of the Northern Cheyenne Reservation as well, too. So the Battle of the Little Bighorn, we have an elementary school that sits about 4 miles from the site of where Custer's last stand was there. And one thing I always kind of throw out a little bit, too, is and I don't know if this is a fun one as much as it's a little bit of pressure. There's about 15,000, between 12 and 15,000 of the numbers I've heard, enrolled members of the Crow tribe. And right now, currently in our school district, we have about 1,500 of those kids enrolled. So about 10%, 1/8 of the overall remaining members of this culture are enrolled in our school. So it's that kind of puts some pressure on us to make sure that we're respecting that culture and working with it so that our kids know about their culture and their traditions.
And a strong identity with that culture. So your ability to kind of navigate, understand, know the history, and appreciate it is just immense, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a huge challenge. And I know later when we start talking about mental health, we've got the latest CDC youth risk behavior report that came out, and that's part of why it's so important for me to be involved in the mental health is there you go, is that, if you look at those subcategories, really our Native American youth are more at risk than any subgroup except for the LGBTQ kids. And, so that's huge importance for us in our district, and, tying that into Maslow's hierarchy of needs, making sure that we're meeting those needs. My community we're ground zero for the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples. There was a Showtime documentary that featured Hardin and actually the school district where I originally started my career as a principal, and just the impact that's had on those communities that just came out about 1.5 years ago.
That's a huge point. I mean, honestly, that's a great, Peter's from Yakima, and the Yakima Nation definitely had a big, I think, a public broadcasting on out of the Yakima Nation. And it's such an interesting context for mental health. I used to be in a district when I started teaching. I was between two tribes, the Squaxin Island and the Skokomish tribes, and both tribes have totally different history on how their treaties came into being. And there's a lot of hurt with one treaty and less hurt with the other one on how one was a very enterprising tribe and one tribe, and I think understanding those cultural contexts when it comes to student mental health, Tobin, I think is incredible. John, so we need to know, you have been literally all over the world of superintendency. So John, tell us about yourself and something unique about the community that we don't know where it is.
Happy to share. And actually, not all over the world, but I've been around North America a little bit. So I did start in Ohio as a high school English teacher and a guidance counselor. So the whole commitment to student mental health and supporting families in terms of mental health has been a part of my entire career. But then I went north and spent a couple of decades in Toronto, Ontario, where I actually was the superintendent. That's a big urban district, 250,000 kids, 600 schools, and all of the dynamics that I think we would probably be aware of in urban settings, serving kids dealing with poverty, serving kids who were quite affluent, dealing with mental health issues that crossed all different groups and demographics. Spend some time also in the district just west of Toronto. Again, a large urban district, a bit smaller, about 70,000 kids. But then I came to San Ramon, California, which is about 30 minutes east of San Francisco. And I've been here for the last 4 years until just this past month, when I moved to AASA as one of the assistant executive directors. And as Peter shared, I get to work with all of the cohorts and all the amazing leaders like yourselves who are leaders of cohorts, and it's quite exciting. So in one sense, even though I am still here in Northern California, and my community that I served is just about 10 minutes away, I would say now that my community has broadened in just this short time of joining AASA, because whether virtually or in person, I've been able to connect with, no exaggeration, superintendents in probably at this point over 200 places in the United States, because I've had a few in-person meetings and many, many virtual meetings. And so my community now is the entire country. And because of that, I am given the amazing privilege and gift that the differences and the diversities and the distinctions across this country are huge. However, no matter where I go, the commitment stays the same: students, focusing on our students. So that's a little bit about me and the community I serve.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk about the ASA mental health cohort. How did it get started, and what are some plans for this school year, the 24-25 school year?
Tobin, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So the history that I know of the mental health cohort, my co-lead as far as superintendents go on the cohort is Paul Imhoff, former ASA president. And when Paul was the president of the association, he was the president coming off of the year of COVID, and we were just starting to get back together in person. And just the strain and the stress that happened to all of us during COVID, our kids and our staff and our colleagues. So Paul's theme during his year of leadership was live well, lead well, take care of yourself, put your oxygen mask on first. And at that time, I was on the executive committee with AASA, and Paul and we had some conversations about my passion around mental health and supporting that. I was a former health teacher, PE teacher, and just that Maslow's hierarchy of needs has always been part of what my focus has been as a leader and even as a classroom teacher. And so Paul had reached out to me and just said, hey, I've been talking to the powers that be at ASA about trying to start this type of a cohort. Is there interest in this? And I just said, yeah, I think there absolutely is. Because even like my background with a little bit of the health, it was more about relationships. It wasn't really diving deep into mental health. And we were just seeing more and more issues. And I had become real passionate about suicide prevention based on some things that happened in my districts, and was doing some work with the Hope Squad, and had actually connected with the Cook Center for Human Connections through the early ed cohort that Peter and I were part of, here 4 or 5 years ago. And so when it started up, I joined immediately. I was part of the initial cohort and worked with Paul on that. And it's just expanded. Like I said, it's becoming more and more evident that this is something. This is a tool that we as superintendents have to add to our toolbox. It's not going to go away. Just I think it was last week the Department of Ed and the OCR came out with 504 guidance for depression and anxiety. So it's something we're going to have to understand. And again, not just for our students, because I don't know that we're equipped to help our students all the time
Mhm,
based
mhm.
on what we've done through our graduate work. But even more uncomfortably, how do we support staff that are struggling with mental health? And how do we help make sure our colleagues are doing well and taking care of themselves as well too? We know this
Yeah,
job. Yeah.
looked at some data that's real recent. So published 2024, the National Vital Statistics Reports from the CDC, and it says that suicide is the second leading cause of death for youth. So it's really a sobering topic.
Well,
The,
and
Yeah. And
also
Peter, one of the things,
you mentioned earlier the youth risk behavior survey. So that's published
Mhm.
2024 as well, and looks at data from 2023. And students experiencing persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, it's at 40%. And we know that from the pandemic, it was actually a little bit higher, 42%, but still 40% is so high for our students. And so just such an important topic. Tell us a little bit. I think you have a summit coming up. Is that right? With the mental health cohort? Can you tell us a little bit
And
about
so
that?
there's
John?
a big summit coming up in October where the social emotional learning cohort and the mental health cohort are coming together. And I think that's going to give us a great opportunity to dive deeply into what it is that we as leaders can do to create the conditions for our students and for our staff. And before I kind of offer another insight there, I just want to take one step back and say one of the reasons why I think the cohort model is an effective one is because what it provides is an opportunity for leaders to come together with others who are also interested in exploring deeply how we can create the conditions for students and staff to be successful in our schools. We have a number of different cohorts, and I know you've been highlighting them, and thank you for that. And in particular, whenever we're talking about students' social emotional well-being and the staff's well-being who have to support our students, I think that it's so important that we're going deep in the mental health cohort because as a former counselor, I know this topic can scare people. We oftentimes hear our staff say, I'm a teacher, I'm a staff member, I'm a principal, I'm a leader, I'm not a mental health expert. And no one is asking anyone to be a mental health expert. However, when we dig deeper into what our students are struggling with, some of what they are struggling with, we do have some ability to influence. Some of the reasons that anxiety is growing, depression is growing. Kids don't feel connected. They're more into their screens than they are into their relationships, etc. There are a number of things that as we learn deeper, we can do something about. And then it is so key to know when it's somebody else's responsibility, say a social worker in our district, a counselor, someone who's more trained. And then when is it that we need to move to that really significant support that requires health professionals that might be outside of the school district? So leaders in schools and in districts have a significant role to play, and our cohort is intended to help us dive deep, support each other, learn effectively, and then create those conditions.
You have a really good, John. I want to dig into this, right? And it's actually our next question too. Is like you kind of broached it, right? Like, but like that level of connectedness is a great example of students are feeling isolated, and we're finding students are struggling now that we've come back full time and the pandemic is beyond us. That skill development for interpersonal relationships has been gone, so students are feeling alone even though they're surrounded by other peers. But I think there's more, right? And more that we're not seeing. And Tobin and John, if you can really talk to us about what are some of the biggest challenges that we're facing when it comes to the mental health needs. And Tobin, what are you seeing when you're in your context versus John has been in this context of, 750,000 students in Toronto versus in Montana? I mean, this is a very, diverse context, but I mean, what some of the things are we seeing that are the same and what are the things we're seeing that are different?
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to go back a little bit to Peter talking about the statistics on the suicide. And one of the things I always talk about when we talk about suicide is that, suicide is a data point and it's one that's fairly easy to measure, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. For every, student that becomes suicidal or, God forbid, attempt suicide, we probably have 50 to 100 other kids that are struggling with their mental health.
I think that's a great lead in too, though, right? Because when we think about like the most extreme case, you know, but there's different levels of triage that we need to be working through, and the needs are so varied.
Yeah. And one of the things I would say, you know, and John did a great job of talking about the value of the cohorts is really, you know, I've always believed the value of the cohort is the connections that you make. You know, I mean, just Peter reaching out to me on this goes back to our time as members of the early learning cohort, and just being able to learn and talk to your colleagues about what's working in their district. And quite honestly, I mean, there's some wrinkles and changes, but you know, whether you have 150 kids or you have 15,000 kids, you're probably dealing with a lot of the same things. And so I think that the role that we can, you know, as superintendents, we can't be experts in everything, but we can certainly find out where the resources are and connect our staff with those resources and get them the ability to connect with them. But most importantly, I think the main thing we can do for mental health as a superintendent is set the culture where it's okay to talk about mental health and get rid of that stigma. Because one of the problems with mental health is you're struggling already, and then you feel like you're the only one going through this. And you don't understand that maybe the kid at the locker next to you, or the teacher across the hall, or your superintendent one district over is actually dealing with the same challenges. And so just being able to open up and be able to have those conversations and not feel, you know, mental health is health, you know, and, you know, small town Montana, it's still, you know, it's okay if my car's parked at the dentist office. It's okay because everybody knows what truck you drive, right? You know, so it's okay if it's parked at the dentist office. It's okay if it's parked at the chiropractor. But gosh, I'm going to park around the block when I go to the therapist, because you want to still keep that hidden, because it's a sign of weakness sometimes. And I just think really stressing that mental health is health, and we got to get rid of that stigma. If every superintendent could just start out with that, setting that tone in their district, we would be on the road to making a real impact.
I think that's
and if I
great.
can just pick up, Tobin, with one piece around that, you know, most, if not all of us, have had a mental health challenge in our lives. And to say that publicly is, as you said, Tobin, is not a stigma. It's just the truth. Now, some young people or our staff members or our community members might struggle with mental illnesses. And that, of course, might need different interventions that go beyond us, as I said earlier. But the concept of mental health challenges, it's part of our lives. You asked a question about what is emerging as some of the biggest issues. And of course, we all know that over the last couple of years, there's been a ton of issues that have even exacerbated what we're talking about.
100%. But I don't think created, John. I want to nail that point, right? I don't think our pandemic we came through created these problems. I think it shined a spotlight.
It absolutely does. And so I'm going to point to one example that's happening right now. So as you know, a number of states are contemplating or have already decided that they are going to limit cell phone use in schools. Okay, let's play this out. These are the same kids that we said, even as young as kindergarten, that you're going to have to live on a screen for a year and a half, give or take. We know that screen time, not just kids, but adults, is an addiction. We know when we step away from any of our habits that need changing, whether it's to the level of addiction or not, there's irritation, there's discomfort, or even more. So just play this out. We're going to say no. And by the way, I do think we need to teach our kids to be really healthy in a digital space. And I think that is adding to mental health challenges. But
I was a former computer teacher.
Exactly. But that being said, we're going to immediately say no to something that we needed pretty much 100% of the time just a little bit ago. We acknowledge that there's potentially an obsession or addiction attached to that use, and we're going to stop it like that without helping our kids be healthy and teaching them about what it means to be healthy. And I just worry about
totally cold turkey, right? Just cold turkey, cut it off.
You know what I mean.
No, you're 100% right? Like, because what we've done is we had a role in creating this addiction, and we didn't have a choice, right? Because this is how we're going to be teaching you. And now we're saying the screen that we only allowed you to learn from, now you're not allowed to look at anymore. And we're saying it's just off, right? I've got the new 100% new cell phone policy. I'm front and center. They are banned in our area. that even though we had a role in this, and there's not like a conversation, there's not a, I think it's a great point on a surface level of mental health and what are we doing with our students. And I think these greater
Yeah,
issues.
let's talk about solutions. In the youth risk behavior survey, they do talk, and they have some current research that they share. Talks about increasing connectedness for young people, because the statistics show that only 55% of students reported feeling a connection at school. The research says when young people feel connected at school, that feeling of belonging protects them from poor mental health, suicidal thoughts, behaviors, and substance use. That research is from 2024 as well. It's the relationship of school connectedness to adolescents' engagement in co-occurring health risk, a meta-analytic review.
That's a great.
I like the meta-analysis, because that's just taking all the research and saying, here's what the research says. So the research says that building connections at school does have a positive impact for kids. So maybe you can share, like, what are some things that you're learning through the ASA mental health cohort? What are some actionable steps that we can take as educators to make a positive impact on student mental health?
Well, I can jump in really quickly because the mental health cohort actually visited my district last spring. And obviously, we're picking up this school year. And one of the things that we focused on was how do we center student voice in a way that really leads to impact, not just a great meeting. And we tried to show examples about how, by placing students in the center of every conversation and in every decision, and when we think about the experience of school through their eyes and from their perspective, it shifts what we do as adults. We talked a lot about how adults can fill a room and talk about students in a way that certainly is well-meaning, but not always able to capture exactly what students need. And so I think that when we center students' voices and experiences, we're influenced by what they have to share, and we're willing to make decisions in light of what we learn, we have just started off in a way that creates some of those conditions for a much healthier student in school. And I think that the cohort has taken a deep dive into how human connectedness, student voice and experience can drive that. So that's just one example. Tobin?
Yeah, I would just echo, what Peter said and what John said is it really comes down to those connections and being able to connect. And, when Peter was talking about that statistic, I'm just going back to the research that we know and we've been talking about for the last 25 years, at least as long as I've been in the business, is that, it takes that one adult, that one connection with an adult. And I think we could probably do a round table and say, who are those adults? I could tell you it was my, football coach and that's why I'm an educator today. But just having that one connection with an adult. And if we're moving further and further away from that, and one of the false narratives that kids tell themselves is, that social media, that embarrassment on social media. There's the situations where kids have been, basically blackmailed because I've got a picture of you doing this or that, and into doing things. And just, making sure that kids understand that, we all went through it, that first breakup, that first relationship. It's not forever. It's not, teaching some of those coping skills as we go through, but just building those relationships and building friendships with people that you can see and touch and be in person with, rather than just those online friends, because, it's, I don't know that there's probably a superintendent. One of my good friends right now is dealing with a situation where they've got an issue with a coach and he's just getting bashed on social media. We've all been through it. It's just having the skills to be able to cope and work our way through that. And we, just like anything, just like teaching algebra or helping a kid on the football field, we have to coach them through that and teach them those skills. And one of the things I talk with adults when we talk about students is we've all been through a situation where it's a loved one going through a medical issue or financial issues or marital troubles, and just trying to focus on what we're doing with our job. Now trying to imagine being a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old that's doing that for the first time, and you got every hormone in the world running through your body, to expect those kids to be able to focus on their schoolwork we got to do triage on their mental health and support them, and then get them back into the classroom and make sure that they're doing what needs to be done in the algebra class.
I love how you
Sorry.
talked about the Maslow hierarchy of needs, and you kind of go through like, what is this going on in your context, and like, does this child have basic safety? And sometimes we think about safe, like is the environment safe? But you're like, does the student feel safe, and what kind of trauma is the student carrying into the safety environment? I'll be honest, I got into redefining ready because I was like, oh man, we've got lunches for all of our kids, but then on June 14th, those lunches go away. And did we give our students any tools? So I'll be honest, you resonated with me because I have a very Maslow hierarchy of needs connection on why I got into redefining ready. So I love that about what you said. But I like how you kind of,
And we do a great job of hitting those physical needs. Like, we make sure kids are safe when they're at school physically. We make sure that we have meals. We make sure that they have backpacks, they have clothes, they have, but on the
things you can
mental
see,
health
right?
side, yeah.
The things you can see.
And it's easy to go to a Walmart or a company and say, hey, will you donate money for our lunches? Because we have kids that don't have meals when they go home. It's a lot harder to go and say, hey, will you donate money to help provide therapy for our kids that are struggling with mental health? And so I just think it's that stigma. We don't think of it as that stigma, but it is somewhere in the back of our heads where it's okay to give a kid a lunch or a breakfast or those type of things. But, then we stop at the level of giving them that therapy or that mental health support that they might need.
Chris and I have talked about what are the structures, as leaders, structures are not going to change unless some leadership steps up and makes the change, right? And helps to build some understanding for the change. So there's that traditional model of kids changing a period every 55 minutes. As a teacher, how can you build relationship when you have all those students in just 55 minutes? So can we change the structure so that there's longer blocks of time and then maybe multi-year, and you're working with kids over, looping or a multi-age cohort. So you have the kids for multiple years, and you're really building those truly strong relationships that really, the kid does know that you're there for them. And those are actually type of relationships that are transformational, that you'll remember after you graduate and you think back on those teachers that made the difference. But we can create structures to help make that happen.
And Peter, if I can just pick up on that, because a cohort model is intended to help leaders think about the structures, the process, the culture, the history that might be holding certain things in place, because we've all been leaders a long time. We know how hard it is to change things because there's a vested interest that some hold. This is how we've always done it. So whether you're a district of 300 kids or a couple 100,000 kids, it doesn't matter. Districts are systems. Systems create culture. And we've got to sometimes interrupt that system and that culture like you just described. There's nothing keeping us from changing some of the structures. Sure, we have some state laws we have to follow, some policies that we probably have to adhere to. I get that. But within those frameworks, there's so much we can do. And again, the strength of the cohort is I get to hear what Tobin's doing to address that issue, or another superintendent or district leader is doing to address that issue. And I'm thinking, hey, wait a second. I've never thought about that before. So then I'm going to try it. And then we come back together as a cohort and we say, what happened? What impact did it have? And that kind of circular loop, if you will, allows us to strengthen our practice. And I think, again, we've all known this. Learning is not private. We got to put our problems of practice, our challenges, whatever you want to say, on the table. And together we can get to a much better place.
I love that. I mean, I love the student-centeredness of that decision, because there's some things we do that add to these problems. And I think this brings us full circle, and I'll have Tobin close us out, is Tobin's point on let's be real honest about mental health problems. But John, to your point on let's just be real honest about our role in that. I mean, I remember when I was doing my action research program, as part of my doctorate program, and I did a study on what is the best educational model for this action research. And we found out like K-8 research proven, just a K-8 self-contained model is the best model, right? Well, why do we rotate our middle schoolers around? Why are we not self-contained 8th grade? Oh, well, the teachers prefer it because I got a bachelor's degree in math, so I want to teach math all day, right? But giving kids 6 bosses a day isn't good for them. right? Well, it doesn't matter. We didn't design it for kids. We didn't design a kid-based industry for kids. We designed a kid-based industry for adults. And we've intentionally created all this stress with 6 different bosses, with 6 different expectations. And then you go out in the hallway for 5 minutes where that's where kids say all the mean things to each other. But I mean, I think that's a great point on if we can be real honest about the needs of kids, we can start thinking about the non-kid based decisions and we can make an adjustment in our role in that. And I love that. So Tobin, I want you to kind of close us out because we only go about 30 minutes on like, what is this big thing and what is the thing you've gotten out of the mental health cohort and what have you been able to provide for others?
And Chris, to go back to that point, that's one of the conversations we're having in my district right now is we have a terrible dropout rate, and how a lot of our barriers are false barriers that we've created when a kid transitions from 2nd grade to 3rd grade and moves buildings and from 5th to 6th, and of course we know from 8th to 9th, how can we be more consistent? How can we change our institutions and as adults to better meet the needs of the kids rather than expecting the kids to change as they go from school to school? And I would just go back to what, as far as what I've learned from the mental health cohort is just really connecting and getting in the room, like John said, with our colleagues that are being successful in other areas, and with some of those partners that work with us. So, I referenced the Cook Center for Human Connections. They're one of our partners with the mental health cohort. I've just learned so much from them and done work with them, and in fact, promoting a little bit the upcoming summit on October 22nd through 24th in Pittsburgh. One of my good friends, we've gotten to be close colleagues over the last couple of years, is Michelle Barch, and she's going to be co-presenting their leadership and happiness, and that's focused on superintendents. Making sure that we're role modeling what we want with mental health for our staff, and then trickling down to our students as well too. We've got Goldie Hawn's group, the Mind Up group, is going to be there. So we got a award-winning actress. We've got a former NBA player and Olympian and Jimmer Fredette talking about his Champions Choose Kindness program. And then this is one that I'm the most excited about is Greg Bear and Ryan Ridazinski, and I know I butchered that, but they're from the Grable Foundation, and they're doing their work around Fred Rogers, work, Mr. Rogers, the people of my generation, which like I'm pretty giddy about that. I was a Mr. Rogers kid growing up, so just being able to connect with those partners and seeing what's out there, and then connecting with our colleagues and seeing what's working. And I wasn't able to go. I had a conflict. I wasn't able to go to San Ramon when they hosted at John's district, but last fall, I went to Oceanside, where Julie Vitale was our host in Southern California. And geez, I just came home with note after note after note of things to follow up with her on. And we're going to steal this, and we're going to take this, and we're going to tweak it. And you just come back from these, in my experience, just excited and revitalized and wanting to follow up on a bunch of those different threads. So it's not too late to register if people are interested. And then, we'll be starting to plan something for the spring as well too. And we're doing that jointly with the social emotional learning group. And it's really good synergy because we're able to pick up and learn from their partners like the Mind Up Foundation, and they're able to work with ours like the Cook Center.
And we'll share the registration link within the comments of this. So with that, I mean, that's kind of brings us to an end. So, hey, I want to thank you all so much. Peter?
Yeah. Just thanks, Tobin. Thanks, John. Great to have you join us this evening. And such an important topic. So really appreciate your time, and appreciate your work helping to lead the AASA mental health cohort. And